The first thing Caleb Whitcomb saw was not the stagecoach, it was the crowd. They stood scattered along the boardwalk of Medicine Crossing like crows on a fence before a storm, pretending to be occupied with ordinary things. Mabel Crowder had one hand buried in a crate of apples outside the Mercantile, though she had already squeezed the same 3 apples twice. Deputy Asa Pritchard leaned against the jailhouse post with his thumbs hooked in his belt and a grin he was not decent enough to hide. Reverend Pike stood near the telegraph office with his Bible tucked under one arm, looking solemn in the way men look when they are hoping for trouble, but want God credited with the witnessing of it. Caleb felt all of them watching him. He stood beside his horse with his hat pulled low, one gloved hand on the saddle horn, the other hanging loose near his side. The October wind came down from the Rocky Mountain front, with teeth in it dragging dust along the street and rattling the loose sign over Braddock's livery. It smelled of old hay, coal smoke, horse sweat, and snow not yet fallen but already promised. He should not have come. He had known that before he ever tied his horse outside the station office. He had known it when Elsie Tuttle, who ran the telegraph desk and knew every secret in town before the person who owned it had time to regret writing it down, gave him that bright, narrow look 3 weeks ago. He had known it when men stopped talking at the feed store whenever he stepped inside. He had known it when Mabel Crowder said loud enough for him to hear that loneliness could make a man do foolish things after 40. Still, he had written the letter. Practical woman preferred. Plain features acceptable, even desirable. Must be willing to work. No expectations of sentiment. This is a working arrangement. Those had been his words. Cold words. Sensible words. Words built like a fence around a place inside him he had no intention of letting another woman enter. 5 years earlier, Rose McKenna had stood him up in a church full of people and married a railroad investor from Helena before the month was out. After that, Caleb stopped attending socials, stopped answering invitations, stopped looking at women long enough for hope to do any damage. He had learned that silence was safer than wanting. Work was safer than tenderness. A cold house was still a house if a man could keep the roof nailed down. The stagecoach appeared at the far end of the street late by nearly an hour. The crowd shifted. Caleb's horse blew through its nostrils and stamped once. Caleb laid a hand against the animal's neck. Easy, he muttered, though he was not speaking to the horse. The coach rolled in under a skin of dust. The driver hauled back on the reins, cursed at the team, and climbed down stiffly. One passenger came out first, a traveling preacher with a carpet bag and a face red from the cold. Then a trader with 2 wrapped bundles. Then the driver reached inside and offered his hand. The woman who stepped down did not take it. She came out of the coach on her own, one boot finding the iron step, one gloved hand gathering her dark blue traveling skirt just enough to clear the dust. She set both feet on the street as if the ground had been waiting for her permission. She was tall, dark-haired, straight-backed. Her face was finer than anything that belonged in Medicine Crossing, with eyes the color of coffee left in the pot, too long, deep, and steady and awake to everything. For one foolish second, Caleb forgot the crowd. He forgot Mabel Crowder and Deputy Asa and the churchwomen pretending not to stare. He forgot the letter he had written. He forgot the 5 winters he had spent alone on the Whitcomb ranch eating supper across from an empty chair and telling himself that peace and emptiness were near enough the same thing for a man of sense. Then the fear came. It moved through him cold and quick, meaner than the wind. Beauty had ruined him once. Not beauty alone, perhaps, but what beauty awakened in a man before it left him standing with his hat in his hands and a church full of pity behind him. A woman that beautiful did not belong in his kitchen by his stove beside his ledger under his roof. A woman like that carried storms with her. Men opened doors for that kind of woman and spent years afterward repairing what came in. She turned toward him. "Mr. Whitcomb," she asked. Her voice was calm, not soft, not pleading, calm. Caleb looked at the leather bag at her feet, then at her face. The whole street waited. He spoke before Mercy could get a hand on him. "There's been a mistake." The silence came down hard. Her chin lifted by the smallest measure. He heard himself continue flat and final, as if the words belonged to some colder man standing just behind his shoulder. "A woman like you cannot be my wife, Miss Mercer. Not because you are unworthy, but because a woman that beautiful can ruin a man twice before he even knows he has opened the door." Mabel Crowder's hand stopped in the apple crate. Deputy Ace's grin faded into something sharper. The woman did not flinch. That was the first thing Caleb noticed after the damage had been done. She did not blush, did not lower her eyes, did not look around for someone kinder to stand beside. She only looked at him. 2 seconds passed. Then she extended her gloved hand. "Then it is fortunate, Mr. Whitcomb," she said, "that I did not come all this way to ruin you. I came because I needed something real, and I was told Montana still had a little of that left." Her hand remained between them. Caleb stared at it. He knew then that he ought to apologize. A decent man would. A decent man would take off his hat and say he had spoken from old hurt and bad manners. But shame had locked his jaw, and the town had pinned his back straight with all its watching. So he took her hand. Her grip was firm. His was firmer. Neither of them let go too soon. "Wagons at the livery," he said. "I assumed you did not expect me to walk to your ranch," she replied. Something moved through the crowd, then not laughter exactly, but the beginning of it swallowed quickly. Caleb turned away before anyone could see his face. Adeline Mercer picked up her own bag before the driver could reach it and followed him down the boardwalk, as if she had not just been publicly rejected by the man whose name she had come west to take. The ride to the Whitcomb Ranch took nearly an hour. Caleb drove fast, though the road was rutted from recent rain and half frozen in shaded places. Adeline sat beside him with her hands folded, her bag braced against her boots, watching the country open around them. Northern Montana did not welcome a stranger gently. It showed itself plain yellow grass gone brittle with frost. Low black cattle moving against the wind, cottonwoods bare along the river, and beyond all of it, the mountains rising dark and severe beneath a sky the color of old iron. The two Medicine River flashed now and then through the breaks, cold and quick, carrying the last of autumn toward winter. "How long have you had the ranch?" Adeline asked. 12 years. How long alone?" His hands tightened on the reins. 5. "What happened 5 years ago? That is not your business." She accepted that for a mile. Then she said, "If I am to live under your roof and carry your name, Mr. Whitcomb, most things will become my business eventually." He gave her one quick sideways look. She was not looking at him. She was studying the south ridge, the fence line, the slope of pasture toward the river, not admiring it, measuring it. "What brings a woman from St. Louis to a place like this?" he asked. "I am not from St. Louis originally." "Where then?" "Virginia." "That does not answer the question." "No," she said. "It only tells you where the answer began." He almost smiled. It irritated him that he almost smiled. The ranch appeared below them, low and gray against the land. The house leaned slightly into the wind as if it had spent years enduring weather with no expectation of praise. The barn roof had 2 patched places. The yard gate hung crooked. A board covered the west kitchen window where glass ought to have been. Caleb felt for the first time in years embarrassed by the sight of it. "It is not much," he said. "I can see that." The answer should have angered him. It did not. It was too plain to be cruel. Inside, she removed her gloves and walked through the house without asking permission. Caleb stood in the kitchen with his arms crossed while she checked the stove, the pump handle, the pantry shelves, the cellar latch, the window patch, and the table leg he had replaced with a cut fence post. When she finished, she looked at him. "The stovepipe needs cleaning before nightfall or you will smoke the house full. The pump seal is failing. Your flour is low. That window board is pine and will rot by spring. The south fence is sagging near the river bend. And unless I am mistaken, you have too many head for the hay stacked in that barn." Caleb stared at her. "You saw all that in 10 minutes. I grew up on a working farm. My father had daughters instead of sons, so he taught daughters. You have been here less than an hour. That does not make the stovepipe cleaner." He looked at her for a long moment. "Your room is upstairs, end of the hall. Supper can wait until tomorrow. You can rest tonight. Rest is for work already done, Mr. Whitcomb. This stove will burn the house down before dawn if that pipe is not cleaned." He said nothing. "Where is the brush? Where is the—" He wanted to refuse her. He wanted to tell her this was his house, his ranch, his failing pump, his dirty stovepipe, his empty rooms. But the trouble with truth was that it remained truth even when spoken by a woman you had insulted in the street. He brought the chimney brush from the back closet. She took it, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work. By supper, the stove drew properly. The kitchen smelled of salt pork beans and cornmeal fried crisp in a pan. Caleb sat across from her beneath the lamplight and watched her eat as though she had always belonged at that table. Halfway through the meal, she reached for the ledger he had left on the shelf. "The ranch is running thin," she said. His fork stopped. "You went through my books? They were on an open shelf. That does not make them yours." "No," she said. "But if I am expected to help keep this place alive, I need to know what is killing it." The words landed harder than he liked. She turned a page. "Your water fees have risen twice in 2 years. Your hay will not carry the cattle through a hard winter. And your south pasture rotation is wrong. I know my own ranch. Then you know I am right." The room went still. Outside, the wind pushed against the walls. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once and stopped. Adeline closed the ledger gently. "I did not come here to be admired, Mr. Whitcomb. I came here to be useful. Whether you are wise enough to see the difference is your affair." He looked at her across the table, at the faint soot on her sleeve, the calm line of her mouth, the steady eyes that had not asked him for kindness once. For the first time since she stepped down from the stagecoach, Caleb felt something besides fear. He didn't know what to call it. That made him dislike it. He went outside after supper and stood in the yard until the cold reached his bones. Behind him, through the kitchen window, he could hear her moving dishes, setting things in order, making sounds in a house that had forgotten anyone else's hands. Before dawn, he woke to the creak of the back door. He came downstairs and found coffee on the stove, a folded cloth over biscuits, and Adeline already crossing the yard in her coat, a small notebook tucked into one pocket. She was walking toward the south pasture, toward the fence line that ran down to the Two Medicine River. Caleb stood at the window. Beyond that fence lay Silas Vane's land. Beyond that fence was the river bend Caleb had not inspected closely since late summer, though some uneasy part of him had known he should. Adeline moved through the gray morning with purpose, her dark skirt brushing frost from the grass. Caleb set his coffee down untouched, took his hat from the peg, and went after her, because a woman who noticed too much on her first day might find the one thing he had spent a whole season pretending not to see. By the time Caleb reached the south pasture, Adeline was already kneeling beside the fence line, with frost wetting the hem of her skirt and one gloved hand pressed into the earth. She did not look surprised to hear him behind her. "You walk fast for a woman who arrived yesterday," he said. "I learned early that slow feet make long days longer." The morning was still half dark. A gray light spread across the valley, thin as watered milk, showing the country piece by piece. The grass lay silver with frost. The cattle stood bunched near the lower draw, black shapes breathing steam into the cold. Beyond them, the Two Medicine River moved in its narrow channel, dark and restless, talking softly against stones and roots, as if it had been awake all night and had no use for sleep. Caleb stopped a few feet behind her. "What are you looking at, this post? It is a fence post. It is a bad one." He almost answered sharp, then stopped himself. She was not wrong. The post leaned toward the Vane side, the wire pulled unevenly across it, and one of the staples had worked halfway loose. He had seen it before. He had told himself he would come back with a hammer and wire stretchers. Then the north pasture needed moving, and the pump seal worsened, and the weather changed, and a man alone learned the dangerous habit of deciding which problems could wait. Adeline stood, brushed the dirt from her glove, and walked along the fence, studying each post as if it were a line in a letter. "You check everything this close?" he asked. "When something is keeping what is yours from becoming what belongs to another man, yes?" The words were plain, but they struck him in the ribs. They walked in silence. Caleb pointed out a weak section near the low draw and told her the cattle pressed there when snow drove them south. She listened, then found 3 places he had not mentioned, one where the wire had been cut and twisted back together poorly, one where hoof tracks showed the animals had been pushing toward the river, one where a newer length of cedar had been used in place of older weathered pine. At the river bend, Adeline stopped. Caleb felt it before he knew why. There are places on a man's own land that begin to trouble him before he has gathered the courage to name the trouble. This bend had been one of those places since late summer. He had ridden past it too quickly. He had looked from a distance and told himself the line was still the line, the post, the river still, where God had put it. Adeline crouched near a survey stake driven into the frozen ground. "This one is new," she said. Caleb said nothing. She dug at the dirt with a small pocket knife, careful and patient. The stake stood clean and pale compared with the older posts around it. 3 feet farther west, nearly hidden under dead grass, was a darker hollow in the earth, round and old and packed with frost. "There was another post here," she said. "That could be anything." "No," she said quietly. It could not. He looked toward the far side of the river. Silas Vane's land began there, wide pasture, better fencing, cottonwoods trimmed back from the bank, a neat line of black cattle grazing under the watch of a hired man too distant to see clearly, but close enough that Caleb knew he was being watched in return. Adeline rose and followed his gaze. "Who owns the far bank, Silas Vane?" She waited. Caleb exhaled through his nose. Richest man in the valley. Owns the freight contract, 3 hay barns, 2 mortgages I know of, maybe more. Gives money to the church roof every spring and takes land from men too tired to fight him by fall. He has tried to buy this ranch 4 times. And you said no 4 times. She looked back at the moved stake. Then someone decided to move the question from money to paper. Caleb felt the cold settle under his coat. A few feet of fence does not make a case. It can if it changes water access. His eyes cut to her. She pointed toward the river bend. If that line shifts west along this angle, the crossing becomes disputable. Not all at once. Not enough to frighten a careless man. Just enough for a lawyer to stand before a judge and say the matter is unclear. The river moved beside them, indifferent and exact. Caleb stared at the hollow in the earth where the old marker had been. He had suspected. That was the sour truth of it. He had suspected something was wrong and let suspicion sleep because waking it meant a fight with a man who had ruined better-positioned neighbors. Adeline looked at him, and whatever she saw on his face, she did not soften her words for it. We need your original survey map. They returned to the house with the sun barely clearing the ridge. By then, the frost had begun to lift in patches, leaving the ground dark and shining. Adeline walked straight to the kitchen table, took off her gloves, and waited while Caleb brought the tin deed box from beneath the loose board in the pantry. He laid out the papers, title transfer tax notices, old survey copy, water rights statement, irrigation fee slips, and receipts from the county clerk. Adeline read quickly, not carelessly, quickly. Her eyes moved in steady lines. She marked figures in her notebook and compared dates against one another, while Caleb stood near the stove pretending not to be impressed. Your water fees increased after the first adjustment filing, she said. What filing? This notation here, county reference only, no full copy attached. He leaned over her shoulder. I never requested an adjustment. I did not say you did. She turned another page. 2 other properties bordering Vane land changed hands in the last 8 years. Caleb's jaw tightened. The Barlows in the Keene place. Boundary trouble, both times. Both families lost access before they sold. Who surveyed those disputes, I do not know. She closed the paper with one finger still resting on the county reference number. Then we ask. Medicine Crossing was awake and watching when they drove in. Yesterday, the town had watched Caleb collect a wife. Today, it watched that wife sit beside him, upright and unsmiling with a notebook in her lap and a purpose in her eyes. At the county clerk's office, the old clerk gave Adeline the look men give women they hope will accept delay as authority. Records like that are not kept handy, he said. Then I will wait while you make them handy. His mouth tightened. Might take some time. I brought a pencil. Caleb turned his face slightly to hide what might have become a smile. An hour later, Adeline found the name she wanted, Cyrus Dahl, licensed surveyor out of Helena. His signature appeared on the Barlow boundary adjustment, again on the Keene dispute, again on a minor water claim involving a strip of land Silas Vane later bought for less than half its worth. When she stepped out of the office, the wind caught the edge of her notebook. She held it flat against her coat. That clerk will tell Vane before supper, Caleb said. I assume so. You say that like it does not trouble you. It troubles me. It does not surprise me. They crossed toward the livery where a Blackfeet horseman stood beside a rangy bay with white scars along its neck. He had been speaking to the hostler, but his eyes moved to Adeline's notebook and then to Caleb. You're asking about the old river line, the man said. Caleb paused. Running Crane. The man nodded once. Adeline looked at him directly. You know that line? I knew it before Vane put fresh posts where old stones already spoke. Caleb went very still. Running Crane pointed south toward the land beyond town. There is a split cottonwood above the bend. Lightning opened it when I was a boy. The old stone marker sits 12 paces north of that tree, half sunk now. Your new wooden stake stands wrong. Adeline's eyes sharpened. Running Crane looked from her to Caleb, then toward the mountains. His voice stayed low. Men can move a wooden stake in the dark, Caleb, but they cannot move a river, an old cottonwood, or the memory of people who knew this land before greed learned to draw maps. For a moment no one spoke. The sentence seemed to settle into the cold air and remain there heavier than weather. What would make you say that in a room with a judge? Adeline asked. Running Crane looked at her, then measuring. A room with a judge is not always a room with truth. No, she said. But sometimes truth needs to enter anyway. Something almost like respect passed through his face. If the day comes, he said, send word. At the hardware counter later, Caleb was buying staples and wire when Silas Vane came in. Vane was a broad, silver-haired man with polished boots and a coat cut better than anything in Medicine Crossing required. He carried himself like the world had been built slightly too narrow for him and would make room if pressed. "Caleb," he said warmly. "Silas." They shook hands. Vane's grip was dry and confident. "Heard your new bride has taken an interest in county records." Caleb kept his face still. "She reads." "So do lawyers," Vane said, smiling. "Usually costs a man money when they do." Caleb said nothing. Vane picked up a brass hinge and examined it. Eastern women come west with many notions. A hard winter cures most of them. Some learn, some need help learning. He set the hinge down. "If you ever find yourself needing help with that ranch, you know where I am." Caleb met his eyes. "I always have." The smile remained. The warmth did not. On the ride home, Adeline listened while Caleb repeated the exchange. She wrote down Cyrus Dahl's name, Silas's comment, the clerk's hesitation. Running Crane's description of the stone marker. "You think he's been doing this for years?" Caleb said. "I think a man does not become practiced at theft the first time he steals." The wagon climbed this ridge above the ranch. Below, the Whitcomb house sat small against the open land, smoke rising thin from the chimney she had cleaned the day before. The south fence ran toward the river like a sentence someone had altered after it was written. Caleb stopped the team for a moment. "If Silas Vane is behind this, he will not stop at a few posts." "No," Adeline said. "He will not. You understand that makes this dangerous?" She turned to him. "Dangerous men rely on people saying that word and stopping there." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he clicked the reins and drove down. That night after supper, a horse came hard up the ranch road. Caleb opened the door before the knock. A boy slid from the saddle, breathless, hat in hand, cheeks red from cold and fear. It was Ned Pritchard, Deputy Ace's nephew. "Mr. Whitcomb," he said. "I was not supposed to hear it." Caleb stepped outside. "Hear what?" "Mr. Vane was at my uncle's rooms behind the jail, him and 2 men from the council. He said he is filing a boundary claim before the month ends." Adeline had come to the doorway behind Caleb. Ned swallowed. "He said your wife is becoming a problem. Said folks need to understand who she really is before she puts ideas in people's heads." The yard went quiet. Caleb felt the old cold anger rise in him, but Adeline's face did not change. She stepped into the lamplight calm as iron drawn from the fire and cooled too slowly to break. "Good," she said. Ned blinked. "Ma'am, a man does not call a woman a problem unless he has already begun to fear what she can see." The boy looked between them, frightened by the meaning of what he had carried. Caleb put a hand on his shoulder and told him he had done right, then sent him home by the lower road. Inside, the kitchen lamp burned low over the open survey map. Adeline stood over it with both hands on the table. Caleb watched the yellow light touch the dark curve of the river, the marked pasture, the place where one false stake might become a stolen ranch. "We need proof," she said. "Not suspicion, not anger, proof that can stand when powerful men tell it to sit down." From where she looked toward the black window where the night had pressed itself against the glass. "Inside his circle, if God is feeling just." Outside, the wind moved across the yard and worried at the barn door. Far off, somewhere beyond the river and the false marker and the Vane fence line, a dog barked once and fell silent. Caleb looked at Adeline and understood that the trouble he had avoided all season had entered his house at last, wearing truth in one hand and danger in the other. The notice was nailed to Caleb Whitcomb's front gate before sunrise, driven deep into the post with a square-headed nail, and left there to tremble in the wind like something meant to be found with cold hands. Caleb saw it when he went out to check the trough. For a moment, he didn't move. The world around him was still blue with morning, the kind of hour when the grass held frost and the cattle were only dark shapes in the lower pasture. The 2 Medicine Rivers spoke faintly somewhere beyond the south fence, hidden by cottonwoods and distance. Nothing in the valley looked changed. That was the cruelty of it. A man could wake to find his land under attack, and the mountains would still stand quiet as judges who had already heard too many prayers. He pulled the paper loose. The nail tore one corner. By the time he brought it into the kitchen, Adeline was already awake, standing at the stove with her sleeves rolled back and her hair pinned without vanity or softness. She turned before he spoke. Her eyes went first to his face, then to the paper in his hand. "It came," she said. He laid it on the table. "Notice of boundary dispute and claim of water access rights. Filed by Silas Vane and Vane Land Holdings against Caleb Whitcomb, alleging improper occupation and use of the lower river access along the western curve of the 2 Medicine. A hearing requested before County Judge Horace Bell. Date to be set within 30 days. Adeline read it once, then again. Judge Bell, she said. You know him. I know his signature. She tapped the lower corner of the paper. It was on 2 of the land transfers tied to Cyrus Dahl's surveys, Barlow and Keene both. Caleb stood with his hat still in his hand. Then we cannot win in his room. No, she said, folding the notice carefully. Not if we agree to stay in his room. He looked at her. She set the paper flat beneath her palm. Then we do not win in his room. We find a higher door. Caleb gave a short, humorless breath. Helena, she said. You go today. Pull everything you can find on Cyrus Dahl, every survey, every filing, every transfer that followed his name. I will hold things here. You will be alone. I have been alone before. The way she said it gave him no place to stand, not because it was sharp, but because it was shut. There was a history behind those words, and Caleb understood enough not to put his boot through a locked door. He rode out within the hour. Adeline watched him disappear over the ridge, then turned back toward the house. The wind lifted the hem of her skirt, cold and insistent, but she did not hurry. There were chores to do before fear could be given room. The stove needed tending. The pump had to be wrapped. The fence wire she had bought still lay beside the barn door, waiting. A ranch did not pause because men in town had written threats on paper. By mid-morning, she was in Medicine Crossing for lamp oil, wire staples, and flour. The town had already changed its way of looking at her, not openly. Medicine Crossing was too practiced for that. But she felt the shift the moment she stepped down from the wagon. Conversation thinned. A woman near the mercantile window turned her head too slowly. Deputy Asa Pritchard saw her and then found something very interesting about the dust on his boot. Inside the mercantile, Mabel Crowder stood near the fabric bolts with Agnes Tilbury and 2 churchwomen. Mabel's eyes flicked toward Adeline, then away. Agnes did not bother pretending. Adeline carried her spool of wire to the counter. Behind her, Agnes spoke loudly enough for every shelf in the store to hear. I heard she was dismissed from a merchant's office in St. Louis. Money missing. Records altered. That is why she came all the way out here. No decent man back east would risk his name. The store went quiet. Adeline set the wire spool on the counter. The clerk looked at his hands. She turned. Agnes Tilbury lifted her chin, dressed in dark green wool with a brooch at her throat, and righteousness sitting poorly on her face. I do not believe we have been properly introduced, Adeline said. Agnes blinked. Mrs. Tilbury, Adeline said. Did you hear that accusation from someone with first-hand knowledge, or did you receive it from a person who expected you to repeat it before you thought to question it? Color rose in Agnes's cheeks. I heard it from a reliable source. Name the source. No one moved. Mabel Crowder looked toward the window. Adeline waited. Agnes's mouth opened, then shut. I thought so, Adeline said. She turned back to the counter, paid for her goods, and gathered them with steady hands. She did not explain herself. Explaining a lie to people who enjoyed hearing it gave the lie a dignity it had not earned. Outside, she made it 6 steps down the boardwalk before a woman's voice stopped her. Mrs. Whitcomb. Adeline turned. Miriam Vane stood half in the shadow beside the milliner's side wall. She was smaller than Adeline remembered from church, pale beneath a brown bonnet, gloved hands clasped so tightly the leather wrinkled. Her eyes moved up and down the street. Please, Miriam said quietly. Not here. Adeline stepped closer enough to shield them from the worst of the wind. Miriam Vane. The woman flinched at her own name. Not so loud. All right. Miriam swallowed. What Agnes said in there. Silas gave her that story. He had it written out. 3 versions, I think. One for the church women, one for the men at the feed store, one for anyone who asks why Caleb Whitcomb suddenly has a wife interested in land records. Adeline held her face still. Why are you telling me? Miriam looked at her then, and beneath the fear was something harder, not courage yet, something that had been pressed under fear for so long it had become dense as stone. I have lived 16 years in a house where truth had to whisper, Mrs. Whitcomb, and I am tired of whispering while good people lose everything. The words came low and fast, as if she had carried them too long and feared they would burn her if kept another moment. What do you know? Adeline asked. More than is safe. A wagon rattled past. Miriam turned her shoulder until it was gone. There is a wooden box in Silas's study. Back closet, lower shelf behind the winter ledgers. He thinks I never look. I have looked. Letters from Cyrus Dahl, survey copies, payments, notes about the Barlow and Keene claims. Her voice thinned. In a letter from Judge Bell. I only read part of it, but it spoke of money for favorable rulings. Adeline's breath went still. Can you get it? Sunday morning. Silas goes to early service and then breakfast with the council. 2 hours if no one delays him. I can have the box by the side door. That puts you in danger. Miriam's mouth moved, not quite a smile. I have been in danger for years. This only gives it a name. Do you have somewhere to go afterward? Miriam looked down. That was answer enough. Adeline thought of the agency road, the small trading cabin north of the creek. The woman she had seen only twice, but already understood better than half the town understood itself. Mary. 2 moons. Adeline said, would she help you? Miriam's eyes lifted quickly. You know Mary, I know of her. She traded dried mint and willow bark with the mercantile this morning. People speak carefully around her, which usually means she knows more than they wish she did. She helped me once. Miriam's voice nearly broke on the word once. After a fall. Adeline did not ask what kind of fall. Then after Sunday you go to her. One night, then to your sister if you have one. Fort Benton. Miriam whispered, my sister Ruth. Good. Miriam stepped back. Do not be late. Then she turned and walked away, small and careful again, her fear closing around her like a shawl. Caleb returned from Helena Saturday evening with road dust on his coat and cold settled in his bones. He came through the kitchen door carrying a leather satchel and put it on the table before taking off his hat. Cyrus Dahl signed 11 surveys in this county in 9 years, he said. 7 came before land sales to Vane. 3 shifted water access. His Helena office is financed through a land company tied to Silas. Adeline set coffee before him. Miriam Vane says Silas has documents proving the rest. Caleb went very still. She told him everything. When she finished, his face had gone hard in a way that made him look older. You are not going to that house alone. I am. No, yes. Adeline. She looked at him over the table. Do not make the mistake of thinking concern gives you ownership. The words struck clean. He looked away first. After a long silence, he said, I wait at the creek crossing. You wait at the creek crossing. Sunday morning came with a sky like hammered tin. Caleb rode with her as far as the lower ford, then stopped under the cottonwoods. His hand rested on the reins. His eyes said what his mouth would not. Adeline rode on. Miriam was at the Vane side door before Adeline dismounted, holding a wooden box against her chest. She crossed the yard quickly and pushed it into Adeline's hands. It is all there, Miriam whispered. The Dahl letters, the payment lists, the judge's letter. Her hands shook. Adeline held the box under one arm. Go to Mary. I'm afraid. I know. At that moment, an older Blackfeet woman stepped from behind the smokehouse with a wool shawl over her shoulders and a calm face worn by weather and years. Mary Two Moons looked first at Miriam, then at Adeline. Fear is a locked room, Mary said, but every locked room has a door. Sometimes another woman must stand outside and call your name. Miriam closed her eyes once, then she nodded. Adeline rode back hard, the box tied beneath her coat. Caleb was waiting exactly where he had promised. He took one look at her face and said nothing, only reached for the box and secured it under his own arm. They were halfway home when a rider came out from the Vane road. A broad man on a dark horse blocked the trail and handed Caleb a folded letter. From Mr. Vane. Caleb opened it. His jaw tightened as he read. Adeline took the paper and read aloud. Return what does not belong to you. Sell the Whitcomb Ranch by Wednesday. Walk away with money and safety or accept the consequences of misunderstanding mercy. The rider's eyes moved to the box, then back. Caleb folded the letter and placed it inside his coat. Tell Silas Vane, he said, that mercy does not usually arrive on a stolen horse. The rider left without another word. That night, beneath a low lamp, they opened the box on the kitchen table. The papers spread before them like bones pulled from shallow earth. Survey fraud, bribes, names, dates, families ruined by ink and cowardice. Caleb sat slowly. This is bigger than my ranch. Adeline looked at the documents, then toward the dark window where the wind pushed against the glass. It was always bigger than your ranch. Your ranch is only the first place where someone finally refused to move. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb stood, took his coat from the peg, and reached for the telegraph note Adeline had already written. Jonas Bellwether, he said. He handled your father's title transfer and never liked Silas Vane. Then send it. Outside, the first hard sleet struck the roof. By the time Caleb rode toward town with the message tucked inside his coat, the storm had begun to cover the tracks behind him, and Adeline remained at the table with the judge's letter under her palm. knowing that truth had finally entered the house, and death might well follow it through the same door. Jonas Bellwether arrived with the storm. The sleet had been coming down since late afternoon, hard and slantwise, striking the kitchen windows with a dry ticking sound that made the whole ranch house feel smaller than it was. Caleb had gone to the barn twice to check the horses, and once more for no reason he could name except that waiting made a man useless in his own skin. Adeline stayed at the kitchen table with the wooden box before her, the judge's letter weighted beneath the coffee tin, and every paper arranged by name, date, and offense. When the knock came, it was not loud. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Danger usually announced itself with fists. Age and certainty knocked once and expected the door to open. Caleb opened it with one hand near the rifle propped behind the frame. A lean man in a dark coat stood on the step-hat brim, dripping white hair flattened by weather. Gray eyes steady beneath heavy brows. He carried a worn leather briefcase in one hand and looked as if neither sleet nor corruption had surprised him in 30 years. Caleb Whitcomb, yeah. Jonas Bellwether. Your wire said a man was trying to steal your river. I thought I had better come before he succeeded. Caleb stepped aside. Jonas entered, removed his hat, and nodded once to Adeline. Mrs. Whitcomb, Mr. Bellwether. His eyes went to the table, then to the box, then to the papers spread beneath the lamp. I see you have not been idle. No, Adeline said. Neither has Silas Vane. Jonas took off his coat, hung it over a chair, and sat without asking permission. For 2 hours he read. He read the Cyrus Dahl surveys, the land transfers, the payment notes, the letter bearing Judge Horace Bell's signature, the old water rights statement, and Adeline's careful notes beside each one. Caleb and Adeline sat across from him and waited while the stove ticked and the storm pressed its cold hands against the walls. Finally, Jonas set down the last page. Well, he said there are men hanged for less complete sins than this. Caleb leaned forward. Can we win? That depends where you insist on fighting. Jonas tapped the judge's letter. In Bell's room, he will bury this before you finish clearing your throat. He will call it improperly obtained. He will question Mrs. Whitcomb's reputation. He will allow Vane's lawyers to speak for 3 hours and give you 3 minutes to defend land your father paid for in honest sweat. Adeline's face did not change. And outside Bell's room, Helena Jonas said, State Land Commissioner, I file a formal complaint before the county hearing proceeds. This letter forces review. The Dahl pattern makes it criminal. If I get there before Bell convenes, he loses authority over the case. Caleb looked toward the dark window. Vane's men will watch the roads. They will watch you, Jonas said. They will watch her. They will not trouble themselves over an old lawyer from Billings leaving before dawn with a bad horse and a worse coat. Adeline slid a stack of copies toward him. The originals stay here. Jonas nodded. Good. Trust no man with the only truth you own. He left at 4 a.m, carrying copied documents in the briefcase beneath an oilcloth wrap. Caleb stood in the yard and watched him disappear into sleet so thick the horse's tail vanished before the man himself did. The storm covered his tracks almost at once. Tuesday stretched like rawhide pulled too tight. Caleb split wood until his shoulders burned. He checked cattle in the north pasture, found nothing wrong, and checked them again. He mended a gate latch that had needed mending since September, and then stood for 10 full minutes staring down the ranch road without knowing he had stopped working. At noon, Adeline set coffee and biscuits on the table. You're watching the road, I know. Watching will not make him ride faster. I know that too. She sat across from him. Outside, the sleet had softened into a cold white mist. Her sleeves were rolled back. There was a thin scratch on one wrist from fence wire and a small streak of flour at the edge of her cuff. Caleb, she said, talk to me. He looked at her then. Really looked. At the woman he had tried to send away in front of the whole town. The woman who had cleaned his chimney, read his ledgers, found the moved marker face-down gossip, and sat now in his kitchen as if the danger coming for them had every right to find her there. For 5 years, he said, I kept this place going by not wanting anything from it except another morning. I didn't ask it to make me happy. Did not ask it to give me comfort. Did not let myself care whether the house was quiet or only empty. His voice roughened despite his effort. Then you came. And in less than a month you have given me more to lose than I have had since Rose walked out of that church. Adeline grew very still. That is not blame, he said. I know. I'm not sure what it is. She looked down at her coffee. It is what happens when surviving stops being enough. Before he could answer, a knock struck the door, hard, deliberate, not like Jonas. Caleb rose. Silas Vane stood on the step with two men behind him. He wore a black coat, fine gloves, and a smile so thin it seemed cut into his face. "Caleb," he said. "May we come in?" "No." The smile did not move. "I hear your lawyer friend left before dawn. Roads are free." "Not always." Silas's eyes slid past Caleb toward the room behind him. "Mrs. Whitcomb, I hope Montana has been instructive." Adeline stood near the table, her hands folded before her. "It has." Silas looked back at Caleb. "Whatever you think you have found, it will not help you. Not here. Not against men who understand how this county works." "Then why come?" For the first time, something in Silas's face cooled beyond courtesy. "Because I am offering mercy before law makes mercy impossible. Return what belongs to me. Sell by Wednesday. Walk away with money. Keep your wife safe from questions she is poorly prepared to answer." Caleb felt Adeline behind him like a flame he did not need to see. "My answer has not changed," he said. Silas leaned slightly closer. "Think carefully about what you are protecting, Whitcomb." "I do." Then Caleb closed the door in his face. For a moment he stood with his palm against the wood, listening to 3 horses turn and ride away. When he looked back, Adeline was watching him. "He knows Jonas went to Helena," she said. "He does not know Jonas arrived." Wednesday morning, the wire came to the telegraph office in Medicine Crossing. Adeline had gone in before the town fully woke, driving alone under a sky-washed pale after storm. The young operator handed her the message and accepted the coin she placed on the counter without asking why her hand paused before unfolding it. "Filed. State review ordered. Bell suspended from matter. Independent hearing officer appointed. Friday 10 o'clock. Bring all parties and witnesses. J.B." Adeline read it once, then again. She folded the paper and walked back to the wagon with her face composed and her breath caught somewhere under her ribs. Only when she was beyond the last storefront did she let herself shake. By Friday morning, the courthouse was full. Medicine Crossing had come to see whether Silas Vane could still bend the valley by looking at it. Men stood along the walls. Women filled the benches. Deputy Asa Pritchard leaned near the door, hat in hand, face troubled. Mabel Crowder sat stiff beside the churchwomen. Running Crane stood near the back, silent and straight as a lodgepole pine. Silas sat with 2 lawyers from Helena, dressed like a man attending a ceremony already decided in his favor. Caleb sat beside Adeline with Jonas between them. The hearing officer, Emmett Graves, called the matter to order. He was compact, square-faced, and showed no interest in pleasing anyone. Silas's lawyer spoke first. The claim was smooth, legal, and poisonous. He presented Cyrus Dahl's survey as fact. He spoke of improper water use, unclear boundaries, territorial grants, and Caleb's supposed neglect of filings. He never once said theft. Men like that never did when paper could do the stealing for them. Then Jonas stood. "I enter into evidence a documented pattern of fraudulent boundary surveys conducted by Cyrus Dahl on behalf of Vane Land Holdings, followed by coerced land transfers from at least 3 families in this valley." The room stirred. He laid the papers down one by one. "And I entered this letter bearing the signature of County Judge Horace Bell, acknowledging payment for favorable rulings in disputes benefiting Silas Vane." The sound that passed through the room was not loud, but it was deep. A whole town drawing breath at once. Running Crane was called. He spoke of the old stone marker near the split cottonwood of the true river line of cattle trails, and memory older than Silas's fences. He didn't hurry. He didn't embellish. Truth rarely needed decoration. Graves read the judge's letter twice. Silas stood too quickly. "This is filth," he said. His voice cracked through the room. "Manufactured by a woman who came here from nothing. A woman with a stained name using a lonely man to climb into property she could never have earned." The silence went flat and dangerous. Adeline did not rise. She only looked at Silas with the same steady eyes she had turned on Caleb in the street. Caleb stood. He faced Silas first, then the room. "I will not let a thief call my wife a schemer in a room full of people who were too afraid to name him what he was." No one moved. Caleb's voice stayed level. "This woman found in 3 weeks what I had been too worn down to see for years. She saw the false marker. She read the records. She followed the money. She stood where men with badges and ledgers and pulpits should have stood before now. If there is shame in this room, it does not belong to her." At the sidewall, a woman who had lost land to Vane whispered, then said louder, "That is right." Graves struck the gavel once. The boundary claim is suspended pending full state investigation. Mr. Whitcomb's current land and water rights remain intact until final determination. All evidence will be forwarded to Helena. Silas did not sit. He looked around the room, and for the first time Caleb saw him understand that power could leave a man while he was still standing. Outside, the cold air hit them clean. Caleb and Adeline stepped onto the courthouse stairs. The town moved around them quieter now, altered in small ways no one could yet name. Caleb reached for her hand in front of all of them. She let him take it. On the wagon ride home, the sky opened blue over the mountains, hard and bright after days of storm. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, Caleb said, "You are not going to tell me you were right." Adeline looked ahead at the road, at the white grass, at the dark line of the two medicine far below. "I never needed to be right, Caleb. I needed you to stop standing alone." He could not answer. The words rising in him were too large for a wagon road and too honest for a man who had spent 5 years pretending his heart was no longer a living thing. The first week after the hearing, Medicine Crossing did not become kind. It became careful. That was different, and Adeline Whitcomb knew the difference well enough not to mistake one for the other. Kindness came from the heart. Carefulness came from fear, shame, or the sudden discovery that a person once judged harmless had turned out to be standing on firmer ground than expected. The women who had whispered over flour barrels did not rush to embrace her. The men who had looked away when Silas Vane spoke threats in polished language did not suddenly become brave. But voices lowered when she entered the mercantile. Eyes no longer lingered with open suspicion. No one repeated the St. Louis lie where she could hear it. That was a beginning. A beginning was not forgiveness. At the Whitcomb Ranch, work continued because land did not pause for justice. The cattle still needed moving before deeper snow. The pump seal still groaned in the cold. The barn roof still leaked over the east stall when the wind came from the mountains. Caleb rose before dawn as he always had, but he no longer moved through the house like a ghost trying not to disturb its own silence. There was coffee now before he reached the stove. There were Adeline's notes beside the ledger. There were 2 coats hanging by the door. Small things, ordinary things. The kind of things a lonely man could live 5 years without noticing he had missed until they stood suddenly in front of him and made the old emptiness look poorer than he remembered. The state investigation moved slowly, just as Jonas Bellwether had warned. Letters came from Helena asking for copies, confirmations, sworn accounts, maps, dates. Jonas answered most of them from Billings, but several required Caleb's signature and Adeline's careful hand. The kitchen table became a second courthouse, papers spread across it every evening, survey maps, affidavits, water rights statements, witness notes, and the old deed box Caleb had once kept hidden beneath the pantry board like a thing belonging to the dead. Silas Vane did not come again. That troubled Caleb more than a visit would have. A man like Vane did not disappear because he had accepted defeat. He disappeared because lawyers had told him silence was safer than pride. Cyrus Dahl surrendered his surveying license before the month ended. Judge Horace Bell resigned for reasons of health, though no one in Medicine Crossing believed health had anything to do with it. 2 families who had lost land to Vane filed civil claims through Jonas's office. A 3rd family was still too afraid, but they had begun sending questions by way of the postal rider, which Adeline considered another beginning. Running Crane came by one cold afternoon with 2 horses to trade and stayed long enough to drink coffee in the kitchen. He said little, but before leaving he walked with Caleb to the south fence and pointed to the place where the true stone marker sat near the split cottonwood. "Snow will cover it," he said. "Come spring we will set a better post," Caleb answered. Running Crane looked at him. "Stone is better than post." Adeline, standing beside them with her shawl pulled tight, said, "Then stone it will remain." Running. Crane nodded once, as if that settled not only a fence line, but a matter of respect. The town changed in small pieces. Mabel Crowder stopped by with news of hay selling cheap from the Lund place, though she delivered it stiffly, as if useful information had been dragged from her by a team of mules. Deputy Asa Pritchard met Adeline outside the telegraph office and removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said, uncomfortable enough to look almost honest, "I owe you an apology." "For what part?" Adeline asked. The question struck him clean. He looked down the street, then back at her, for not asking harder questions sooner, for hearing things and deciding it was easier not to know whether they were true. "Why didn't you?" He rubbed the brim of his hat with one thumb. Vane had kin and money tangled through half this town. Pulling at him felt like pulling a thread on a coat a man still needed to wear, and now Asa gave a tired, rueful breath. Now I reckon I need a different coat. Adeline nodded. That is a start. She did not smile. A start did not deserve a smile yet. The letter from Miriam arrived in the second week of November, carried by a postal rider whose horse steamed in the yard while Caleb signed for the envelope. The handwriting was neat, thin, and careful. Adeline knew it before she opened it. She read it at the kitchen table while Caleb was outside fitting a new hinge to the barn door. Miriam wrote from Fort Benton. She was with her sister Ruth. Mary Two Moons had kept her one night in a small cabin, smelling of sage, dried mint wood smoke, and safety. The word safety appeared twice in the first page, as if Miriam was still testing whether it could be written without punishment. She wrote that she had slept through an entire night without waking to listen for footsteps. She wrote that she had chosen her own dress that morning and cried while buttoning it because no one had told her blue made her look foolish. She wrote that fear had not left her all at once, but it had begun losing its authority. Near the end, the writing pressed harder into the paper. I watched you walk into a valley that did not know you and refused to become smaller for its comfort. I had forgotten a woman could do that. I had forgotten I was allowed to want such a thing for myself. If my nieces ask me one day how I found the courage to leave, I will tell them courage first came to me wearing a dark blue traveling dress, carrying a notebook, and asking questions men had spent years teaching women not to ask. Adeline set the letter flat beneath both hands. For a long while, she did not move. When Caleb came in, he stopped just inside the door. He saw her back first, the stillness of it, the careful way she was breathing. He removed his hat quietly and hung it on the peg. Adeline. She turned before the softness in his voice could undo her. Her face was composed. Her eyes were dry, but something in her looked as land looks after hard water has passed over it and taken the topsoil with it. She pushed the letter across the table. He read it. Standing at first, then sat before he reached the second page. When he finished, he folded his hands over the paper and looked down at it for a time. She is right, he said. Adeline's mouth tightened. I was not brave. Caleb looked up. I was angry, she said. I was angry that Silas counted on fear the way other men count on rain. Angry that he could move a fence ruin a name, by a judge, and trust decent people to stay quiet because silence felt safer than truth. She turned toward this window. Snow had begun to gather in the far grass, thin and uncertain. I cannot stand a man who counts on other people's fear. I know, Caleb said. His voice was low enough that she looked back. I counted on it too. Not like him, not to steal from anyone, but I counted on people not looking too close. I built a life small enough that no one could see I was barely holding it together. The stove ticked. The wind worried at the corner of the house. You saw me, he said. Right there in the street, before you knew whether I deserved mercy or not. You hurt me in the street. I know, but you looked ashamed after. Her voice softened, though not weakly. Not embarrassed. Ashamed. There is a difference. Embarrassment fears being seen. Shame knows it has fallen short of what is right. He looked at her then with a grief so plain it needed no dressing. I have been falling short for 5 years. No, she said. You have been afraid for 5 years. He stood slowly. The room felt smaller with him standing, not because of his size, but because something long withheld had risen with him. He came around the table and stopped before her, not close enough to trap her, close enough to be honest. I asked for a woman I could never love, Adeline, and God punished my cowardice by sending me the only woman who could make me want to live again. The words did not come easily. That made them truer. I knew, he said, somewhere in the first week. Maybe that morning you walked the south fence before dawn. Maybe when you told me my books were wrong and looked ready to fight me if I argued with arithmetic. I knew I was in trouble. I had asked for plain, safe, simple, a woman who would not reach whatever was left of me. His mouth moved almost a smile and almost pain. Then, there you were, cleaning my stovepipe, finding stolen land, facing down Vane, and making this house sound alive. I did not stand a chance. Adeline looked at him for a long moment. All her carefulness did not vanish. It rested. That was different. She did not become smaller. She simply stopped bracing herself against being struck by joy. I think I loved you when I saw what your shame cost you, she said. A bad man would have been proud of hurting me. You were not. You were scared, and scared men say cruel things, but good men suffer after they have said them. He lifted one hand slow enough for refusal. She did not refuse. His palm touched the side of her face. Her hand rose and covered his. There was no grandness in it, No thunder, no sweeping declaration for a town to witness, only the stove, the snow. Miriam's letter on the table, and two people who had spent weeks fighting everything except the thing happening between them. Outside, winter committed itself. Snow fell over the barn roof and the repaired window. It softened the wagon ruts, covered the hoof marks near the gate, and laid a clean white hand over the south pasture. It fell on the split cottonwood and the stone marker that had outlasted lies. It fell on the Two Medicine River, melting as it touched the dark current. 3 months later, the final ruling arrived in a thick envelope brought straight to the ranch. Caleb read it first at the kitchen table. His eyes moved carefully down the page. Adeline stood beside him, one hand resting on the chair back. He handed it to her. The Whitcomb Ranch's land and water rights were confirmed in full. Vane Land Holdings was ordered dissolved pending criminal proceedings. The Barlow and Keene claims were reopened for compensation. Cyrus Dahl faced charges. Horace Bell would answer to Helena. Miriam's testimony had been accepted under protection. Running Crane's statement regarding the original river boundary had been entered into permanent record. Adeline finished reading and set the paper down. "It is done," she said. Caleb looked toward the window, toward the land his father had worked. The land Silas had tried to steal. The land Adeline had helped him see clearly again. "It is done," he said. For a moment they simply sat with it. Then Adeline looked toward the east pasture. "We need another water trough before spring." Caleb stared at her. Then he laughed. It startled him, that laugh. It came from somewhere loose and young and almost forgotten. Adeline smiled, warm and unguarded, the kind of smile Medicine Crossing had never earned and never would. "I will build it," he said. "We will build it," she answered. And that was how the matter truly ended. Not with a cheer, not with a kiss in the street, not with Silas Vane dragged in chains before the town that had feared him too long, but with a woman saying "we" as if it were the most natural word in the language, and a man hearing it as if he had spent half his life walking cold roads just to arrive at that one syllable. That evening, snow fell again over northern Montana. Inside the Whitcomb house, the stove burned steady. The final ruling lay folded beside the ledger. Caleb and Adeline sat at the kitchen table with their hands joined near the edge of the paper while the wind moved over the pasture and the river held its rightful course in the dark. For the first time in 5 years, the silence inside that house was not empty. It was full of everything they had fought for, everything they had forgiven, and everything they would build from here on under the plain, powerful shelter of the word "we."